They came for our minds because our bodies were too much trouble. That was a lesson the Vothari Hive learned on a frozen moon called Kessler Nine in the long winter of 2347, when a psychic empire that had broken 47 civilizations met one tired platoon of human marines and discovered far too late that some doors should never be opened. This is the story of how the invaders became the ones who begged to leave. The moon was a graveyard before the humans ever arrived. Kessler Nine orbited a dying red dwarf in the Outer Vail, a place the star charts marked with the soft warning that meant nothing official lived there anymore. Wind cut across the ice plains at speeds that would peel paint from a tank. Nights lasted 90 hours. The sky never showed more than a smear of bruised purple where the sun should have been. It was, by any reasonable standard, a place no one should fight over. Which is exactly why Command sent the 63rd Marine Reconnaissance Platoon to hold it. Sergeant Marcus Halloway, called Mars by everyone who had surfed with him longer than a week, stepped off the drop shuttle into wind that tried to take his face off. He was 38 years old, with the kind of weathered jaw that looked like it had been carved by a sculptor who had run out of patience. He had served 3 tours in the Belt Wars. He had buried his younger brother on a moon not unlike this one, 6 years earlier, and he had never once spoken about it to anyone in uniform. He kept that wound the way other men kept photographs, folded small, tucked deep, taken out only in private. Behind him came 11 Marines, the entire roster of the 63rd, and they moved off the ramp with the quiet, practiced economy of people who had learned the hard way that complaining did not warm a man. There was Corporal Lena Vasquez, his second, a sniper from a coastal town in what had once been Texas. She had a laugh like gravel in a tin can, and a habit of naming her rifles after ex-boyfriends, none of whom, she said, had ever shot us straight. There was Private First Class Quaim Okafor, called Tank because he was 6'5" and built like a foundation pillar. He carried photographs of a 4-year-old daughter named Adaezi inside the chest plate of his armor, where, he said, the heaviest thing a man could carry should ride. There was Doc Chen, the platoon medic who never spoke about the family she had lost in the orbital strikes on Luna, but who hummed lullabies under her breath while she stitched men back together. There was Specialist Yusuf Tariq, the platoon's electronic warfare expert, who could make a dead radio sing and who carried 3 different chess sets because, he said, you never knew when the universe was going to give you a worthy opponent. There was Private Jakub Kowalski, the rookie, 22, and still wearing his terror like a coat that did not quite fit. He told jokes constantly, terrible ones, the kind that made you groan and then somehow miss them when he stopped. And there was Lieutenant Diego Reyes, 27 years old, fresh out of the academy with 2 campaigns under his belt and a personnel file thick with commendations. He was a good officer. Mars had served under worse. He had not, however, served under any officer this young, who had not yet learned the difference between being right and being effective. The other 5 Marines were good soldiers, all of them, men and women who had bled for the Republic and would bleed again. Their names mattered. Huang, Petrov, Adebayo, Castellanos, Gata. Mars knew every one of them the way a shepherd knows his flock, by the small tells, by the breathing, by the silences. Their orders were simple. Hold the listening post on Kessler 9. Watch the dark. Report any movement. Do not engage. The post was a half-buried bunker complex left over from a forgotten survey expedition. 3 levels of reinforced concrete dug into the south face of an ice ridge. It had a fusion core that still worked, a kitchen with 17 flavors of ration paste, and a long-range subspace antenna that pointed at an empty sky. For 9 days, nothing happened. On the 10th day, the antenna picked up something the technicians could not identify. A signal in a band that should have been silent. A pulse, slow and patient, like a heartbeat coming from outside the system. Tariq spent 6 hours trying to decode it before he gave up and called Mars over to look at the waveform. It was not random, that was the problem. It had structure. It had rhythm. It was, Tariq said quietly, almost like someone was speaking. Mars stared at the screen for a long time. Then he ordered a full perimeter alert. Lieutenant Reyes overruled him. Their orders were observation only. They were not to escalate. The signal could be a natural phenomenon. The Outer Vail had strange physics. The Vothari were 100 light-years away, contained behind the treaty line, and there was no record of them ever crossing it. Mars did not argue. He simply walked to the armory and began checking weapons, one by one, in the slow, methodical way of a man who has stopped trusting orders that did not come with weight behind them. The Vothari hit the post on the 11th day. They did not come in ships. They did not come in armor. They came as a swarm, a long black ribbon of chitinous bodies pouring across the ice plain from a crater that, according to every scan, had been empty an hour earlier. They had 6 legs and a segmented thorax that pulsed with a soft blue light, and where their faces should have been, they had a cluster of black, oily eyes and a vertical mouth that opened in 4 directions. They moved without sound. The wind covered them. By the time the perimeter sensors registered the heat signature, they were already halfway to the bunker. What followed was 37 minutes of the worst close-quarters combat Mars Holloway had ever survived. The Vothari did not use weapons. They did not need to. They opened their 4-part mouths and unfolded blades of glassy bone, and they came over the perimeter wall in a black tide that screamed in a frequency just beneath human hearing. Lieutenant Reyes died first. He was on the upper observation deck when they breached. He emptied his rifle into the swarm and shouted orders that were drowned in the wind, and then a Vothari blade took him through the throat, and Mars heard the sound he made, the small surprised sound, before the comms cut out. Mars took command on the next breath. He pulled the platoon back, level by level, into the bunker. He sealed bulkheads with thermite charges. He set Tariq to work on the fusion core, rigging it to overload on a dead man switch. He put Vasquez at the long corridor on level 2 with her rifle and gave her permission to do what she did best. She killed 31 of them in the first 5 minutes. Mars counted, because counting was something to hold on to. Tank held the staircase on level 1 with a heavy autocannon and a kind of patient fury that seemed to come from somewhere very far inside him. Doc Chen ran between the wounded with her hands red to the elbows, humming under her breath, a song her mother used to sing. Kowalski the rookie, the Joker, took a Vothari blade through his femoral artery in the kitchen, of all places, with 17 flavors of ration paste shelved behind him. Doc got to him in 12 seconds. She did everything right. He still bled out in her arms, looking up at her with the wide, soft eyes of a boy who could not understand why the joke had ended. His last words were, "Doc, tell my mom. Tell her I." He never finished. Mars heard it on the squad channel because Doc forgot to mute her mic, and he closed his eyes for 1 second, exactly 1, before he kept fighting. By the time they were down to the 3rd level, 8 of them remained: Mars, Vasquez, Tank, Doc, Tariq, Juan, Adebayo, Nada. They were dug in behind the last bulkhead in a circular command room with the fusion core thrumming beneath their boots. The Vothari were piled 3 deep in the corridor outside. There must have been 400 of them, maybe more. The bodies kept coming. And then, all at once, the bodies stopped. The wind outside stopped. The sound stopped. The thrumming of the core seemed for a moment to hold its breath, and in the silence, something entered Mars Holloway's mind. It did not knock. It did not announce itself. It simply arrived, the way a draft arrives when a door opens somewhere in the house, and you cannot quite tell where. The voice that spoke inside his skull was not a voice. It was the idea of a voice the way a memory of music is not music. It was old. It was vast. "You are surrounded," the not voice said. "You are 8. We are Legion. Open your minds. We will make this gentle. We have done this many times. We are very good at it. Open, and we will take only what we need, and you will sleep, and you will not feel the ending." Mars looked around the command room. Every single one of his Marines was staring at nothing, eyes wide, the same expression on each face. They were hearing it too. He keyed the squad channel. His voice was hoarse. His voice was steady. "Marines," he said. "We have a guest." Vasquez was the first to laugh. It was not a kind laugh. It was the laugh of a woman who had buried 2 brothers and a husband, and who had made a private peace, a long time ago, with the fact that the universe owed her exactly nothing. "Oh," she said, into the channel and into her own mind, both at once. "Oh, you poor stupid thing." What happened next has been studied by xenopsychologists for the better part of a generation, and they still cannot fully explain it. The official report calls it a cascading neurolinguistic feedback event. The Vothari Hive, when it survived to write its own account, called it the drowning. Mars Halloway, who lived through it, called it Tuesday. The Vothari Hive was a single mind distributed across millions of bodies. Their conquest method had worked on 47 civilizations because every species they had encountered, when faced with a psychic invader inside their own thoughts, had reacted the same way. They had panicked. They had tried to push the invader out. They had focused on the intrusion, given it shape, given it attention, and in giving it attention they had given it purchase. The Vothari fed on focus. They climbed it like a ladder. Once they were inside, they unraveled the host the way a cat unravels a sweater, pulling at the brightest threads, the loves, the fears, the pride. The Vothari Hive Mother, an entity called by her subminds Skeltara Prime, opened the link to the humans expecting the same. She got, instead, Sergeant Marcus Halloway. And Mars Halloway, when something tried to climb into his mind, did not push it out. He did not panic. He did not focus on the intrusion at all. He focused on his brother. He focused on Daniel, 8 years old, the summer they had built a treehouse in the backyard of the house in Tucson. The summer their father had still been alive. The summer the cicadas had been so loud you could feel them in your chest. He focused on the smell of pine sap on his hands. He focused on the way Daniel had laughed when the rope swing had finally held his weight. He focused on every detail, every color, every sound, until the memory was so vivid that the command room and the Vothari and the cold and the dead all faded into a kind of secondary noise. And then, because Daniel was dead, because Daniel had died screaming in a trench on Europa with his guts in his hands, Mars let the memory turn. He let the rope swing become a shroud. He let the cicadas become the sound of a medevac that had not arrived in time. He let the summer become the winter, and the laugh become the last small sound a brother makes when he is asking his older brother to please not let him be alone. He poured all of it down the link. Skeltara Prime had been inside the minds of 47 civilizations. She had tasted their fears. She had drunk their loves. She had never, in all of her long existence, encountered a wound that a host had chosen, deliberately, to weaponize. She tried to disconnect. She could not. Because Mars was not the only one. Vasquez was sending the Vothari her brothers, both of them, the older one who had died in a refinery accident at 17, and the younger one who had hanged himself the year after. She was sending them the husband who had been on the Geneva when it went down. She was sending them, with a kind of awful generosity, every ex-boyfriend she had ever named a rifle after, and the precise reason each one had earned it. Tank was sending them his daughter, Adaeze, 4 years old. The way she said the word elephant, la font. The way her hand felt when it closed around his finger. The way he had cried alone in the barracks bathroom the night before he had shipped out, because he had realized suddenly that she would not remember him if he did not come back. He was sending the Vothari every photograph in his chest plate, every birthday he had missed, every Skype call with terrible bandwidth, every drawing she had made of him as a stick figure with too many fingers. He was sending it as love. He was sending it as a mountain. Doc Chen was sending them lullabies, her mother's voice, her grandmother's voice. The names of the dead on Luna, all of them, everyone she could remember, and some she had only read on the casualty lists. She was sending them grief like a tide, grief that had nowhere to go, grief that had, for years, sat in her chest like a stone she had learned to breathe around. Tariq was sending them chess problems. He was sending them the Sicilian defense and the Queen's Gambit, and an obscure variation he had invented when he was 16 and lonely. He was sending them every game he had ever lost, every game he had ever won, the precise reason he had started playing in the first place, which was that his father had taught him on a board with 3 missing pieces, and his father was now also dead. Wong was sending them his divorce. Adebayo was sending them the dog he had left behind. Gata was sending them a string of profanity in 7 languages, accompanied by mental images so anatomically specific that even a hive mind that had conquered 47 civilizations recoiled. And Kowalski, dead in the kitchen with his blood cooling on the tile, was sending them somehow through the residual neural echo that the Vothari had not yet released. Every terrible joke he had ever told. The one about the chaplain and the mongoose. The one about the 3 engineers and the airlock. The one about his mother's cooking, which he had told 17 times in his short career, and which had never been funny, but which he had told anyway, because he had loved his mother, and because making people groan was the closest he could get to making them feel better. The Vothari Hive had no defense for this. They had evolved to harvest minds that closed against them. The harder a mind resisted, the easier it was to pry. They had no protocol for minds that opened, that flooded, that gave them everything at once, the love and the grief and the rage and the terrible jokes, all together with no filter, no order, no shame. It was, for Skeltar Prime, like trying to drink from a fire hose. And then when she tried to pull back, she discovered that the connection was not one way. It had never been one way. The Vothari had simply been too efficient on 47 previous worlds to notice. The humans were inside her now too. Mars Holloway, in the command room on Kessler 9, opened his eyes and saw the hive. He saw a great pale shape buried in a warm trench beneath the ice, 6 kilometers down, an organism the size of a city, swollen and many-limbed and ancient. He saw the millions of subminds connected to her, like fronds of light. He saw the world she had eaten. He saw, with a clarity that staggered him, that she was afraid. She was afraid because she had felt his brother. She had felt Daniel D. She had felt it the way Mars felt it every night for 6 years. She had felt it, and she could not unfeel it, because the Vothari did not have a mechanism for forgetting. Every memory was preserved. Every wound once received was carried. Mars did something then that the after-action reports would never quite capture, because he himself could never quite explain it. He spoke to her, not aloud. Down the link, the way she had spoken to him. "You came here," he said, "to break us." He felt her recoil. He felt her try again, weakly, to pull back. "You should have read your own files," he said. "You should have asked someone what humans are. We are not the 47. We are the ones who were born on a death world. We are the ones who buried our gods and kept walking. We are the ones who carry our dead inside us and use them for fuel." He let the next thought come slowly, deliberately, so that every submind connected to her would feel it. "You are inside us now," he said, "and we are inside you. And if you do not pull every one of your minds out of every one of mine in the next 60 seconds, I am going to show you what my species does when it decides that something is a threat to its young." He thought of Tank's daughter. He thought of Ade as a 4 years old, saying "elephant." He thought of every child on every human world. And he let Skeltar Prime feel what he was willing to do. He let her feel the orbital bombardments of the Belt Wars, the salt the Romans had poured into Carthage, the fire bombings of the 20th century, the scorched earth of 100 retreats. He let her feel the way humans, when cornered, when their children were threatened, did not fight to win. They fought to make sure that whatever survived would never, ever try it again. He let her feel that he, Marcus Holloway, with 8 Marines in a bunker on a dying moon, was prepared to detonate the fusion core beneath his feet, vent the resulting plasma down through the ice into the warm trench where she lay, and personally escort her into the dark. And he let her understand finally that the rest of his species was worse than he was. Skeltar Prime had conquered 47 civilizations. She had eaten gods. She had walked through the dreams of empires. She broke. The disconnection was not gentle. It came a wave, a great sucking pull, as every Vothari mined on the moon and in the trench and in the ships hidden beyond the moon's small cold sun yanked itself free of every human thought it had touched. It left echoes. It left bruises. Mars staggered. Tank went down on one knee. Doc Chen vomited onto her own boots and then, calmly, professionally, kept working on Adebayo, who had taken a blade through the shoulder somewhere in the last hour and had not mentioned it. In the corridor outside the command room, 400 Vothari soldiers turned, in perfect unison, and walked away. They climbed back over the perimeter wall. They marched in a long black ribbon back across the ice plain. They poured into the crater they had come from. The crater closed behind them. Somehow, the ice knitting itself shut in a way that the post-survey teams would later spend years failing to explain. And then, in the sky above Kessler 9, where there should have been nothing, 3 Vothari Hive ships briefly became visible as their cloaking fields collapsed under the strain of the retreat. They were the size of small moons. They had been there the whole time. They turned, they left, they went home. The 63rd Marine Reconnaissance Platoon sat in the command room and, for a long time, did not speak. It was Vasquez, finally, who broke the silence. "I need a cigarette," she said, in a voice that was almost steady. "I have not smoked in 11 years. I need a cigarette so badly I could chew through this wall." Tariq laughed. It was a small, cracked sound. Then Tank laughed. Then Doc Chen, who was still kneeling beside Adebayo with a needle in her teeth, started to laugh. And once she started, she could not stop. And the laughter turned to crying and then back to laughter again. And none of the Marines looked away from her, because none of them had any room to judge. Mars sat down. He sat down on the floor of the command room with his back against the bulkhead, and he put his head in his hands, and for the first time in 6 years, he let himself think about Daniel without immediately turning the thought into something he could use. He just thought about him. The summer, the treehouse, the cicadas. He cried for about 90 seconds. Then he wiped his face on the sleeve of his armor, stood up, and started organizing the evac. The relief ship arrived 41 hours later. By then, the 63rd had buried their dead in the ice, with the small ragged ceremony that Marines used when there was no chaplain and no ground that would hold a grave. They had said the names. Wong, who had died in the last hour with Adebayo's hand in his. Castellanos, who had died on level 2 without anyone noticing for almost an hour, because she had gone quietly, because she was the kind of woman who had always gone quietly. Petrov, who had taken 11 Vothari with him on the staircase before he fell. 5 names, 8 survivors, 1 moon held. The debrief took 3 weeks. The classified parts took years. The Vothari, true to whatever had passed between Mars Halloway and Skeltara Prime, did not return. They withdrew behind the treaty line and they stayed there. A year later, a small unmanned probe arrived in human space, broadcasting in a band the cryptographers eventually identified. It carried a single message in a syntax that had clearly been assembled with great care. The message said, "We did not know. We will not come again. Please do not come for us." The Republic Council debated for a long time about what to do with this message. There were factions that wanted to push the advantage. There were factions that wanted to send a fleet through the treaty line and finish what the 63rd had started. The argument ran for months. In the end, it was Sergeant Mars Halloway, retired, called to testify before a closed session, who decided it. He stood up. He was 42 years old by then. He had a small scar along his jaw from a Vothari blade and a small daughter at home named Hana, after his mother, and he had not worn the uniform in 3 years. He said, "You did not feel her." "I did." He said, "She has carried what she did to 47 worlds for a long time. She is going to carry it for a much longer time. The Vothari do not forget. That is their punishment now. That is the thing we left inside her." He said, "If you send a fleet, you will be sending it because you are afraid. I understand being afraid, but I have looked into the mind of the thing that conquered 47 civilizations, and I am telling you, she is more afraid of us than we will ever be of her. Let her stay afraid. Let her teach her children to stay afraid. That is the wall. Build anything else and you will break it." The council voted. The fleet did not sail. The treaty line held and is holding still. Mars Holloway lived to be 87. He died in a small house in Tucson, in the same neighborhood where he had built a treehouse with his brother, surrounded by his daughter and his 3 grandchildren and a yellow dog named Kowalski. Vasquez was there. So was Tank, who had become a school principal, of all things, and who had brought his daughter Adese, now grown, now an officer in the Republic Navy. Doc Chan had passed 2 years earlier. Tariq sent a recording from his retirement on Mars, in which he played, badly, on a very old acoustic guitar, a song that Kowalski had once tried to teach him in a kitchen on a frozen moon. In the last week of his life, Mars Holloway dreamed of Skeltara Prime. He dreamed she was old. He dreamed she was tired. He dreamed she was sitting in the warm trench beneath the ice on Kessler 9, where she had lain for 10,000 years, and he dreamed that she said to him, in the not voice that he still remembered the shape of, "I have carried them. All of them. The 47 and your 5. I have carried them every day. Was it enough?" And Mars in his dream sat down beside her in the dark, and he thought about it for a long time. He thought about Daniel. He thought about Kowalski. He thought about Reyes, whose first command had been his last. He said finally, "It was not enough. It will never be enough. But you carried it. That is the part that matters. You carried it and you did not come again." And then, because he was a Marine, and because some things did not change even at the end, he added, "And if you ever do come again, I will personally crawl out of this grave and finish what we started." Then Mars Holloway closed his eyes and he did not open them again. The Vothari have not come back. They will not come back. Somewhere beneath the ice on a forgotten moon in the Outer Vail, an old, vast mind remembers a sergeant in his platoon. And she remembers in particular a rookie's terrible joke about a chaplain and a mongoose, and a 4-year-old girl saying "elephant," and the smell of pine sap in a Tucson summer, and a medic humming a lullaby for the dead, and she carries it. She carries all of it. That is the cost of trying to take what humans will not give. That is the wall the 63rd built, with 5 graves in the ice and 8 names that came home. That is why the Hive entered our minds, and why, in the end, it begged to leave. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Midnight Galaxy for more tales of humanity, holding the line in the deepest dark.